a 16-year-old boy, his body rotting from leprosy, stood before his council of knights. They told him it was suicide. Saladin commanded 26,000 warriors. They had barely 500. The odds? 50 to 1. Every logical voice screamed, "Retreat, hide, survive." But this dying teenager did something no one expected. He put on his silver mask, mounted his horse, and rode straight into hell. What happened next defied every law of warfare and became the greatest military miracle in medieval history.
The year was 1177, and Jerusalem was dying. Not from siege or famine, but from something far more insidious: fear. Fear that crept through the stone corridors of every castle, whispered in every marketplace, and haunted every prayer at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. At the heart of this crumbling realm sat a king unlike any other. Baldwin IV was merely 16 years old, but Baldwin had already fought a war far longer and more cruel than any crusade. His enemy wasn't an army, it was his own body. Leprosy had chosen him as its battlefield. The disease consumed him slowly, deliberately, rotting his flesh, stiffening his joints, stealing his youth piece by piece. His skin cracked and bled. His fingers curled into useless claws. The priests called it divine punishment. The physicians called it incurable. Baldwin called it his cross to bear. Behind a silver mask that concealed his ravaged face, those blue eyes still burned with unshakable fire. While Jerusalem withered, the south exploded with power. Sultan Saladin, the world would know him simply as Saladin, had done what seemed impossible. He united the crucial Islamic world under one banner. Damascus bowed to him. Cairo answered his call. Aleppo marched beneath his standard. Now 26,000 warriors assembled in the Egyptian desert. Mamluk cavalry whose horses moved like thunder. Sudanese infantry as steady as stone. Turkish archers who could pierce mail at 200 paces. Their singular purpose? To erase the Crusader kingdom from the earth. Saladin's green banners rippled across the horizon like an emerald ocean, endless and unstoppable.
The war council met in Jerusalem's Great Hall. Torchlight flickered across stone walls as messengers delivered the impossible news. 26,000, my lords, perhaps more. The silence that followed was suffocating. "We cannot meet him in open battle," one nobleman declared, his voice trembling. "To do so would be madness." "Madness and suicide," another agreed. "The odds are 50 to 1, perhaps worse. We must retreat behind our walls, shut the gates, pray for mercy or divine intervention." The voices rose, one after another, each finding a new reason why fighting was impossible. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. They were outnumbered so completely that engaging Saladin would be military suicide. But then, from the throne came a sound that silenced them all. Baldwin IV rose. His movements were slow, painful, each gesture a small victory against his failing body. But when he stood, when that silver mask caught the torchlight, every man in that hall stopped breathing. His voice emerged quiet, but unwavering. "If God wills it, then I will ride. I will meet Saladin on the field. Jerusalem does not surrender while I still draw breath." It was madness, complete, suicidal madness. And yet something ignited in that room. The Templars, warrior monks who had sworn their lives to Christ, stepped forward. The Hospitallers followed. From distant castles, riders came bearing the news their king would fight, and they would die beside him. In the end, barely 500 knights answered the call. 500 against 26,000. Every single one of them knew they were riding to their deaths. They departed from Ascalon as the sun climbed toward its merciless apex.
The desert stretched before them, an ocean of gold and fire that had swallowed armies since the dawn of time. Baldwin rode at the column's head. That silver mask gleamed in the brutal sunlight, hiding the disease but unable to conceal the trembling in his hands or the weakness in his frame. Each moment in the saddle was agony, each breath was a battle, but he sat straight, banner flying above him, the golden cross of Jerusalem against a white field. Beside him rode Odo de Saint-Amand, Grand Master of the Knights Templar. The old warrior's face was grim, his eyes scanning the endless horizon. "Sire," Odo said quietly, "we ride to our deaths. You understand this?" Behind that silver mask, Baldwin's blue eyes turned to meet his. "Then let us ride, Sir Odo, as if we were already immortal." The Templar Grand Master had fought in a dozen campaigns, had stared down death more times than he could count. But in that moment, from a dying boy half his age, he heard something that made his warrior's heart thunder. Not fear, not resignation, pure, unshakable faith. The column moved deeper into the wasteland. Behind them, Jerusalem grew smaller. Ahead, destiny waited at a place called Montgisard. As they rode, the knights began to sing. Old hymns, battle songs, prayers set to melody. Their voices carried across the empty dunes, defiant against the silence of the desert. Baldwin listened, and despite everything, despite the pain, despite knowing what awaited them, he smiled beneath his mask.
From Egypt's northern frontier, Saladin's army moved like a living thing, a serpent of steel and silk that stretched for miles across the sand, 26,000 strong. At its head, mounted on a magnificent black Arabian stallion, rode the Sultan himself. Saladin was 40 years old, in the prime of his power, commanding an empire that stretched from North Africa to Mesopotamia. He was scholar, warrior, and prophet of a new Islamic age. Around him, his emirs and officers radiated confidence. How could they not? The army they commanded was the most powerful force assembled in the Holy Land in living memory. A young emir named Rashid rode close to the Sultan. "The Franks will see our numbers and flee, my lord. Their walls will crumble at the sight of our banners." Saladin's expression remained thoughtful. Perhaps. But even lions fight when cornered. Never underestimate desperation. Still, even the Sultan allowed himself to believe. Jerusalem lay open before him. The Crusader forces were scattered, weak, leaderless. Baldwin was a child dying of plague. What army could he possibly muster? The army swept northward with breathtaking speed. Gaza fell without resistance. Ramla opened its gates rather than face annihilation. Fortress after fortress surrendered or simply fled at the news of the Sultan's approach. Victory seemed so assured that Saladin made a decision that would haunt him forever. He left behind his siege engines, his baggage train, and supply columns. "We'll take Jerusalem before we need them," he told his advisors. "Speed is more valuable than preparation." The army pushed deeper into Crusader territory, moving toward the coastal plains near a small place called Montgisard. The long column wound through the wasteland, stretched thin across miles of barren ground. Men sang victory songs. Some had already begun dividing the spoils of Jerusalem in their imaginations. Then, a Mamluk outrider reined his horse sharply, his hand rising to shield his eyes from the sun. Something had caught the light on a distant ridge, a flash of metal, there and gone. "What was that?" he muttered. Before anyone could answer, the sound came. Horns. Deep, resonant war horns that echoed across the valley like the voice of God himself. The sound rolled over the Muslim army, turning blood to ice. And then they appeared. From behind the ridge, descending like an avalanche of steel and rage, came 500 mounted knights. Their armor caught the sun in 1,000 points of brilliant light. Their lances lowered as one, an iron hedge of death. Their battle cry shook the very air. Deus vult! Deus vult! Deus vult! God wills it. At their head, a figure in a silver mask, banner streaming behind him, the golden cross blazing against white silk. The Leper King had not fled. He had been waiting. Saladin's eyes widened in disbelief as 500 knights accelerated down the slope, building momentum, building speed, building into an unstoppable force of nature aimed directly at his army's exposed flank. "Sound the alarm!" he roared. "Close ranks! Close the—" The world became thunder. 500 knights crashed into 26,000 men with the force of a divine hammer. The sound alone was apocalyptic. The front ranks of Saladin's army simply vanished. Men and horses went down in a tangle of broken bodies.
Baldwin IV crashed through the enemy line like a stone through glass. His lance shattered against an enemy shield, and he drew his sword, fighting with a fury that seemed impossible from his disease-ravaged body. The pain, the weakness, the slow death that had plagued him for years, all of it burned away in that moment. He was no longer a dying boy. He was the righteous sword of God. Around him, the Templars and Hospitallers carved paths of destruction. These were warrior monks who had spent their entire lives training for this single purpose, to fight and die for Christ. And die they would, but not before taking dozens of enemies with them. Odo de Saint-Amand fought beside his king, his sword rising and falling in terrible rhythm. "Press forward!" he roared over the chaos. "Break their center! Break their will!" The knights obeyed, driving deeper into the Muslim army like a spear through flesh. In the Muslim ranks, discipline evaporated into panic. "What is happening?" a soldier screamed. "They're everywhere!" another cried. Though it was impossible, 500 men couldn't be everywhere. But it felt like they were. Arrows flew in wild confusion, striking friend as often as foe. Camels broke loose from the supply train, trampling through ranks of infantry. Orders became screams, became prayers, became silence. Saladin forced his horse into the heart of the chaos, his guards surrounding him. "Hold the line!" he commanded. "By God, hold your ground!" But his words were lost beneath the thunder of hooves and the relentless war cries of the Crusaders. Through the choking dust and spraying blood, Baldwin fought like a man possessed. His silver mask was streaked with blood. Wherever he rode, the enemy broke and fled.
The Sultan's golden standard, the symbol that had united Islam, that had conquered Damascus and Cairo, wavered. Then it fell. The cry that went up from the Muslim army was pure anguish. Warriors who had fought with courage moments before suddenly looked around and saw not victory, but annihilation. Their Sultan's banner was down, their formations were shattered, and still the silver-masked demon and his immortal knights kept coming. "Fall back!" someone screamed. "The Sultan's standard has fallen! We're surrounded! They've killed thousands!" None of it was true, but truth doesn't matter in the chaos of battle. Fear does, and fear spreads faster than fire. Emir al-Adil grabbed his brother's reins, his face desperate. "My lord, we must withdraw now. The army is breaking." Saladin looked around at the impossible scene. His mighty host, 26,000 strong, was dissolving into a panicked mob. Men threw down their weapons and ran. Cavalry abandoned infantry. Officers fled faster than common soldiers. The Sultan's face twisted with rage and shame.
"By God, I will return," he said through clenched teeth. "I swear upon my father's grave, I will—" "My lord, now!" Al-Adil kicked both horses into a gallop, pulling Saladin away from the slaughter. The Sultan's personal guard followed, fighting a desperate rearguard action to save their master's life. As Saladin fled south, he looked back once. Through the dust and smoke he saw it. That silver mask, gleaming in the sun, surrounded by white-mantled knights, still pushing forward, still attacking. A 16-year-old boy dying of leprosy had just shattered the greatest army in the Islamic world.
The Crusaders didn't stop. With victory in their grasp, they pressed the advantage with merciless efficiency. Every time the Muslim forces tried to reform, another charge scattered them. Every attempt to rally was met with thundering hooves and leveled lances. The retreat became a rout. The rout became a massacre. For 10 miles, the Crusaders pursued. Muslim soldiers threw away armor, weapons, anything that slowed them down. Some fell to their knees, begging for mercy. Others simply kept running until exhaustion and dehydration claimed them. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the sands around Montgisard were painted red. 20,000 bodies, 20,000 lay scattered across the desert. Saladin's magnificent army had ceased to exist. Finally, as darkness gathered, Odo de Santamon raised his hand. "Enough," he commanded. "Let them run. Let them carry the news of this day." The knights, bloodied, exhausted, barely able to sit their saddles, slowly came to a halt. And only then did they realize they had won. Against all odds, against all reason, against the very laws of warfare itself, they had won. Baldwin IV dismounted with difficulty. His strength was gone, burned away in the fury of battle. His hands trembled so badly he could barely remove his mask. When he did, his face was pale as death, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes sunken with exhaustion. But those eyes still blazed. He fell to his knees beside his exhausted horse, his voice barely a whisper. "Not by my hand, Lord, not by my strength, not by my will, only by yours, only by yours." It fell over Montgisard like a shroud. The moon rose, full and pale, casting silver light over a landscape that had been transformed into hell. As far as the eye could see, the dead lay in heaps. 20,000 men who had marched north singing victory songs would never return home. The survivors, barely 250 of Baldwin's 500 knights, moved through the aftermath like ghosts themselves. Their armor was dented beyond recognition. Their white mantles were soaked black with blood. Many were wounded. All were exhausted beyond measure. But they had survived the impossible. Priests moved among the fallen, offering last rites to the dying. Their prayers mixed with the moans of wounded men and the restless snorting of horses. Torches flickered to life across the camp, small islands of light in an ocean of darkness. Baldwin IV sat on a fallen tree trunk, unable to stand any longer. The battle's fury had kept the pain at bay, but now it returned with vengeance. His disease reasserted itself, joints on fire, skin cracking, fingers curling into useless claws. Giovanni of Ibelin approached with a water skin. "Sire, you must drink." Baldwin took it with trembling hands, spilling more than he drank. When he finished, he looked at his cousin with eyes that held a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Of theirs? At least 20,000 dead or dying, the rest scattered to the winds. And ours?" Giovanni's voice dropped. 253 knights remain. We lost nearly half. Half.
247 men had ridden into immortality today, never to return.
Odo de Saint-Amand approached, limping from a sword wound to his thigh. Behind him, a group of squires carried captured enemy banners, dozens of them. The green standards of Damascus, Cairo, and Aleppo. The personal banners of emirs and officers. They planted them in the sand before Baldwin's feet, a forest of conquered pride. Saladin's own standard was among the captured, Odo reported. He fled so quickly he left everything behind. The baggage train, the siege engines, even his personal tent. One of the squires stepped forward. "My lord, there's gold enough in the baggage train to rebuild every fortress in the kingdom. Silk, armor, weapons, spoils beyond counting." But Baldwin barely looked at the treasure. His gaze remained fixed on those fallen banners, symbols of the mighty army that had come to destroy his kingdom. "Give the gold to the families of our fallen," he said quietly, "and to the church, and to any who need it. I want none of it." Odo's scarred face creased in something like a smile. "Sire, most kings would. I am not most kings, Sir Odo." Baldwin's voice was gentle but firm. "God gave us victory today, not gold. The gold is a burden I won't bear." The Templar Grand Master knelt before his king, driving his sword point first into the bloodied sand. "Jerusalem lives because you did not yield. You, my lord, are more than a king. You are God's chosen weapon." Baldwin shook his head, reaching out to touch the old knight's shoulder. "No, my friend, I am only his servant, and a poor one at that. He struck them down. I merely had the privilege of witnessing it."
As the night deepened, messengers returned from the field with reports. "My lord, there are hundreds of enemy soldiers wandering the desert, wounded, lost, begging for water. Some ask to surrender, others simply wander." The knights looked to their king, waiting for the order. This was holy war. Mercy was not required. In fact, many would say it was foolish. Baldwin looked out at the moonlit desert for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying despite its weakness. "Let them live." Silence fell over the camp. "My lord?" Giovanni asked carefully. "Enough have died on this sand. Let those who survive carry the story of this day. Let them tell how a handful of dying knights, led by a dying king, trusted in God and were not forsaken. Perhaps some will see his hand in this, and their hearts will turn." It was naive, idealistic, the sort of thing young men believed before war taught them otherwise. But every knight who heard those words felt something stir in their chest. They had just witnessed a miracle. Why shouldn't their king believe in another? "As you command, sire," Odo said. "We'll send water and allow them to leave with their lives." Baldwin nodded, then stood with difficulty. "Now, if there is a priest available, I would like to pray, not in thanksgiving for victory, that prayer I already gave on the field, but for the souls of all who died today, theirs and ours alike." He walked slowly toward the small campfire where the priests had gathered, his legs barely supporting him. Behind him, the surviving knights watched their king, a 16-year-old boy whose body was dying, but whose spirit had just moved mountains.
Far to the south, Saladin rode in silence with what remained of his guard. His head was lowered, his eyes shadowed. The proud sultan who had united Islam now fled through the desert like a common fugitive. One of his emirs spoke softly, breaking the oppressive silence. "My lord, how could this happen? 500 against 26,000. Saladin did not answer for a long time. His horse continued its weary pace, hooves crunching in the sand. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The hand of their God is heavy. I felt it today.
like standing before a storm, powerless to resist. He paused, then his jaw tightened. But the desert remembers all. One day I shall return, and the Lion of Jerusalem will not rise again. Al-Athir, riding beside his brother, glanced at him with concern. "My lord, you speak as if you respect him. This leper boy who—" "Respect him?" Saladin turned sharply. "I fear what stands behind him. That was no mortal victory we witnessed. That was—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. The sands whispered around them, carrying his vow into the endless night. Behind them, the glow of Crusader campfires marked the site of their humiliation. Ahead lay the long journey back to Cairo, where he would have to explain the unexplainable. How does an emperor of Islam lose to 500 dying knights? How does God's chosen champion fall before a diseased child? Saladin had no answers, only questions that would haunt him for years to come.
Dawn broke over the killing fields like a resurrection. The first rays of sun touched the captured banners still planted in the sand, making them glow with strange beauty. Baldwin woke from a fitful sleep to find priests already moving through the camp, singing morning prayers. His body screamed in protest as he sat up. Every muscle ached, every joint felt like broken glass. The disease had taken advantage of his exhausted state, advancing its terrible work. But he was alive, and Jerusalem still stood. "Sire," Odo appeared beside him, offering bread and wine. "We should make for Jerusalem. The men need proper rest, medical attention, you especially." Baldwin accepted the food with hands that trembled so badly he nearly dropped it. "Yes, but first, make sure every injured man receives water and whatever aid we can provide, friend or foe." "It's already being done, my lord. Your orders from last night." The king nodded, satisfied. "Then let us go home." The column that began the journey back to Jerusalem looked nothing like the army that had ridden to Montgisard. These were broken men on exhausted horses, their armor hanging in pieces, their weapons notched and dulled. But word of their victory had spread faster than they could ride. By the time they reached the first village, the entire population had turned out. Old women wept. Children ran alongside the horses, reaching up to touch the knight's stirrups as if they were holy relics. Men knelt in the dirt as Baldwin passed. "The Leper King," they cried. "God's champion. 500 against 26,000. He drove Saladin into the desert."
At each village, the crowds grew larger. Flowers appeared, thrown before the horses' hooves until the road was carpeted in petals. Songs erupted spontaneously, ancient hymns mixed with new verses praising the young king who had saved Christendom. Baldwin rode through it all in a daze, barely acknowledging the celebration. The praise felt wrong, almost blasphemous. He hadn't won the battle, God had. He was merely the flawed instrument through which divine will had been enacted. Giovanni noticed his cousin's discomfort. "Sire, the people need this. They need to believe in something greater than their fear. Let them celebrate." "They celebrate me," Baldwin replied quietly. "They should celebrate him." "They do, my lord, through you." As Jerusalem finally came into view, its golden walls glowing in the afternoon sun, the sound reached them. Bells! Not just one church, but every church in the city, every tower, every chapel, every tiny monastery, all of them ringing their bells in a cascade of joyous sound. The gates stood open. The entire city had turned out. Thousands of people lined the streets from the gates to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Monks held candles despite the daylight.
Nuns waved palm fronds. Nobles in their finest clothes stood shoulder to shoulder with beggars in rags. For this one moment, all divisions of class and status disappeared. They were simply Christians witnessing the return of their Savior King. Long live Baldwin, God's chosen, the Leper King who humbled Saladin. The shouts echoed from the stone walls, building into a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city.
Baldwin rode slowly, his silver mask reflecting the afternoon light. He tried to sit straight, to present the image of a triumphant king, but his body betrayed him, trembling, weak, barely able to stay in the saddle. At the gates of the Holy Sepulchre, the Patriarch of Jerusalem waited, surrounded by his bishops and priests. The old man's face was wet with tears as Baldwin dismounted, nearly falling, caught at the last moment by Giovanni. The Patriarch fell to his knees. "My son," his voice broke, "God has delivered his city through your hands. You are his miracle made flesh." Baldwin wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't him, that he was just a dying boy who had somehow survived when he shouldn't have. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply shook his head and whispered, "Not through my hands, Father, through his mercy alone." Inside the church, cool darkness offered relief from the blazing sun and the overwhelming crowds. The knights filed in, removing their helms, their faces drawn with exhaustion and emotion. One by one, they approached the altar and laid down their swords. The sound of steel against stone rang out like bell tones, each one a prayer, a thanksgiving, a vow renewed. Odo de Saint-Amand laid his great blade before the relic of the true cross, then stepped back and lowered himself painfully to his knees. All around him, hardened warriors did the same, men who had killed dozens that day, whose hands were still stained with blood, now wept like children. The choir began to sing. Their voices rose through the vaulted ceiling, Latin words of thanksgiving and praise. Baldwin knelt before the altar, his silver mask removed, his ravaged face exposed for all to see. He didn't care anymore. Let them see what God had chosen, not a perfect vessel, but a broken one. "Thank you," he whispered, his words lost beneath the choir's song. "Thank you for letting me serve. Thank you for saving your city. Thank you for proving that even the weakest can be made strong when they trust in you." Tears ran down his scarred cheeks, mixing with the blood and dust still caked there. Behind him, Giovanni and Odo exchanged glances. They had both seen many things in their years of war: courage, cowardice, triumph, tragedy. But they had never seen anything like this, never seen faith rewarded so dramatically, so completely. "I don't think I've ever truly believed before today," Giovanni admitted quietly. Odo nodded slowly. "Neither had I, my friend. Neither had I." Outside, the bells continued their joyous clamor. The people sang in the streets, celebrating deliverance from certain doom. Wine flowed freely, strangers embraced. For one brief, shining moment, the kingdom of Jerusalem seemed eternal, blessed by God, protected by a miracle king, destined to stand forever. But in the royal palace that night, alone by a window overlooking the city he had saved, Baldwin knew the truth. This victory had cost him everything. The battle had consumed the last reserves of his strength. He could feel it, death drawing closer,
eager to claim what the disease had been slowly taking for years. He looked out at the torchlit streets, at the celebrating crowds, at the city that would outlive him. Baldwin's hand rested on the cold stone windowsill, fingers already beginning to stiffen from the advancing disease. The celebration below seemed distant, as if happening in another world, a world where dying kings didn't exist, where miracles were permanent, where victory meant something more than borrowed time. "So long as I breathe," he whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible even to himself, "no man shall take you. And when I can no longer breathe, may God send someone else to stand where I stood." The words drifted out into the night, a prayer, a blessing, and a farewell, all woven together. He knew, with the clarity that comes to those who dance close to death, that Montgisard had been his moment, his one perfect day when weakness became strength, when faith moved mountains, when the impossible bowed before the will of God. There would be no second miracle. The disease would continue its inexorable work. His body would fail piece by piece until nothing remained but memory and legend. But for tonight, Jerusalem celebrated. For tonight, his people believed. For tonight, the kingdom stood strong. And if that was all he could give them, one day of hope, one impossible victory, one story they would tell their children and grandchildren, then perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was what God had always intended. Baldwin closed his eyes and smiled. Not the bitter smile of a dying man, but the peaceful smile of one who had fulfilled his purpose. Tomorrow would bring pain. Next month would bring decline. Next year might not come at all. But today he had saved Jerusalem.
Winter came to Jerusalem with unusual ferocity that year. Cold winds swept down from the Judean hills, rattling shutters and chilling bones. But no cold compared to the ice that slowly crept through King Baldwin's body. The leprosy, held back during the battle by sheer force of will and adrenaline, returned with vengeance. It advanced faster now, as if angry, being denied its prize at Montgisard. Baldwin's fingers, already stiff, began to curl completely. His skin, once merely pale, turned gray and began to slough away in patches. His strength, never great to begin with, faded like mist before the sun. The court physicians shook their heads in private. 6 months, one whispered, perhaps less. But the king's spirit remained unbroken. Word of Montgisard spread across Christendom like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. Pilgrims came from England, France, Germany, even distant Scandinavia. They traveled for months to reach Jerusalem, all wanting the same thing, to see the young king who had defied impossible odds. They found him in the palace, often seated because he could no longer stand for long periods. The silver mask remained in place during audiences. Behind it, those blue eyes still blazed, though pain shadowed them now. "Your Majesty," a French knight said, kneeling before the throne, "all of Christendom speaks your name. You are the new David, the warrior king who slew Goliath." Baldwin's voice, though weak, carried gentle reproach. "I am no David, Sir Knight. I am merely a servant who was fortunate enough to witness God's power. Do not make an idol of me." But they didn't listen. They couldn't. The world needed heroes, needed miracles, needed proof that God still intervened in human affairs. Baldwin IV had become that proof, whether he wanted to be or not. Chroniclers came,
writing down every detail they could gather. The story of Montgisard would be recorded in dozens of chronicles, preserved for future generations who would shake their heads in disbelief. 500 against 26,000? Future scholars would mutter. Impossible! The numbers must be exaggerated. But the numbers weren't exaggerated. If anything, they understated the impossible nature of what had occurred. Giovanni of Ibala entered quietly one evening, finding Baldwin at prayer before a crucifix. The king's armor stood beside him, the same battered mail he had worn at Montgisard. He kept it close now, a reminder of that perfect day when everything had aligned. "Your body needs rest, my lord," Giovanni said gently. Baldwin smiled faintly, the mask of silver lying beside him on the table. "My body has never obeyed me," he whispered, "but my heart still listens." He lifted his gaze to the crucifix. "Christ bore his cross until the end. I must bear mine." Giovanni bowed his head. "You carried more than any man could." Baldwin turned to him, his eyes clear despite the fever burning behind them. Montgisard was no triumph of arms. It was a warning. God lent us his hand for a moment to show us what faith can do, but he will not fight our battles forever. The next time Saladin comes, he may test our hearts instead. Outside, the bells of the sepulchre tolled the hour. The city slept, unaware that its greatest king was already fading into legend.
From the southern deserts, traders brought whispers. Saladin was rebuilding, gathering new armies. His pride was wounded but not broken. The crescent would rise again. Baldwin knew it. He felt it in the tremor of the wind, in the silence of his dreams. He looked to the distant hills, where the moon hung low above Jerusalem's walls. "Let him come," he murmured. "When he does, may he find men still brave enough to die as we did." The candle flickered, and the boy who had humbled an empire bowed his head in prayer. Outside, the city of God slept beneath a fragile peace. Years would pass, and the desert would heal its scars, but men would remember. To the south, in Cairo, Saladin rebuilt his strength. He forged alliances, trained new legions, and swore that the humiliation of Montgisard would be avenged. Yet in his heart burned not only anger, but respect for the young king who had defied him with nothing but faith and courage. More than once, when his generals mocked the Franks as weak and dying, Saladin silenced them. "You speak of disease," he said coldly, "but that boy shamed me before God and men. Pray that when your time comes, you face death as he did, without fear." He would not move against Jerusalem again until the time was perfect. In the north, Baldwin IV ruled from his throne, his body nearly ruined, but his will unbroken. He could no longer ride a horse, nor even hold a sword. Yet from his chair of state, he directed the affairs of the kingdom with fierce clarity. The nobles who once doubted him now obeyed in silence. Giovanni of Ibelin and Odo de Santamond carried out his orders, strengthening the fortresses along the borders. Still, the king knew the truth. The peace he had won was fragile, a line drawn in sand before the tide. One night, a messenger arrived from the desert, a half-dead scout from the southern frontier. "The Sultan moves again," he gasped. "He gathers the tribes. The banners of Damascus and Cairo march together." The court fell silent. Baldwin dismissed his council, save for his closest companions. "He will come for us," the king said softly, "but he will not find us sleeping." He looked to a nearby tapestry depicting the Battle of Montgisard, knights charging through clouds of dust,
a silver-masked figure at their head. His hand trembled as he touched the fabric. "Once," he whispered, "God gave me the strength of 10,000 men. I will not ask for that again, only that he grants me the courage to face what must come." Far away, beneath a crescent moon, Saladin's banners rippled over the dunes. Two kings, one broken, one unbowed, watched the same stars and prepared for the reckoning to come. Between them lay the silence of the Holy Land, waiting for the roar of destiny.
The year was 1185. The kingdom of Jerusalem stood in uneasy peace, its borders ringed by fortresses and its throne draped in silence. King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, was dying. The disease that had devoured his flesh now reached his heart. In the royal palace, sunlight fell through colored glass upon his bed. The once bright eyes were now dim, the once steadfast hands little more than bone. Giovanni of Ibelin sat beside him, silent. The priests had come and gone, the sacraments had been given, but Baldwin was not afraid. He stared toward the window, where beyond the city walls rose the Mount of Olives, bathed in gold by the setting sun. "Giovanni," he whispered, "do you hear it?" "Hear what, my lord?" "The wind. The same wind that blew across Montgisard." A faint smile touched his lips. "It still carries the sound of hooves." Giovanni bowed his head, fighting back tears. "The knights remember, sire. All of Christendom remembers." Baldwin's breath came slow and shallow. "Tell them this," he murmured. "It was not our swords that won the day, but our faith. I was no hero, only a witness. Let them believe, even when they are few, even when they are dying, for God is strongest in the weak." Outside, the bells of the Holy Sepulchre began to toll. The sound drifted through the window, mingling with the whisper of the desert wind. Baldwin closed his eyes. "The Lord is my strength," he said softly, "and my shield." When the bells ceased, the boy king who had defied an empire was gone. He was 24 years old. He had ruled for 11 years while his body slowly died around him. And for one perfect day at Montgisard, he had been immortal. The city mourned for 40 days. From the poorest pilgrim to the proudest noble, they lined the streets as his coffin passed. Not as a leper, not as a diseased outcast, but as the Lion of Jerusalem, the king who had saved them when all hope was lost. Odo de Santamand, now an old man himself, walked beside the funeral procession. Tears streamed down his weathered face. "I have fought in 100 battles," he told Giovanni, "but I never saw anything like him. Never will again." Giovanni nodded, unable to speak. He remembered that day in the desert, the silver mask gleaming, the impossible charge, the boy who became legend. "He was the best of us," he finally managed, "the very best." Far away in Damascus, when news reached him, Saladin stood in silence. His courtiers waited for triumphant words, but the Sultan simply bowed his head. "May God have mercy on him," he said quietly. "He was a king." And so, two great enemies were bound by the same desert wind, one by death, the other by memory.
Years later, when Saladin finally took Jerusalem in 1187, the chroniclers recorded something extraordinary. No blood was spilled that day. No massacre occurred. The Sultan, who could have put every Christian to the sword, instead showed mercy.
He allowed the people to leave with their lives, paid ransom for those who couldn't afford it, and even returned captured Christian soldiers to their families. His officers questioned this unusual clemency. Why show mercy to those who had resisted for so long? Saladin looked toward the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, silent for a long moment. "Because once," he finally said, "a dying boy showed me what true courage looks like. He could have hidden behind his walls. He could have surrendered. Instead, he rode out with 500 men to face my 26,000. He paused, remembering that day in the desert when his mighty army broke before an impossible charge. That day taught me something. Faith, real faith, is more powerful than any army. And courage, true courage, deserves respect even in one's enemy." The chroniclers wrote that perhaps the spirit of the Leper King still walked Jerusalem's walls that day, watching over both conqueror and conquered. Perhaps Baldwin's final prayer had been answered, that even in defeat, mercy would prevail. For courage, they whispered, does not die with kingdoms. It echoes through history, inspiring even those who once stood against it. The legend of Baldwin IV, the 16-year-old boy with a rotting body and an unbreakable spirit, would outlive empires. 800 years have passed since that November day in 1177. Empires have risen and fallen. Kingdoms have turned to dust. The very landscape of the Holy Land has been transformed by time and conflict. But the story remains. In history books and chronicles, in whispered legends and documented facts, the Battle of Montgisard stands as a monument to the impossible. 500 knights against 26,000 soldiers, a dying teenager leading men into certain death and emerging victorious. Modern historians debate the details. Some question the numbers, seeking rational explanations for the inexplicable. Others point to terrain advantages, strategic mistakes by Saladin, the element of surprise. All true, perhaps, but none of it explains the central mystery. How does a boy whose body is being consumed by leprosy, who can barely hold his reins, whose strength is fading with each breath, find the will to charge into an army 50 times his size? How does he not just survive, but triumph? The answer, perhaps, lies not in military strategy or tactical genius, but in something simpler and more profound: faith. Not the passive faith of prayer alone, but active faith, the kind that puts on armor despite trembling hands, that mounts a horse despite failing legs, that charges into impossible odds because surrender is simply not an option. Baldwin IV lived only 24 years. For most of them, he was dying. Yet in that brief, pain-filled existence, he proved something that echoes across the centuries. Weakness can become strength when coupled with unshakable conviction. Today, if you visit Jerusalem, you can walk the same streets Baldwin rode through on his triumphant return. You can stand in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where he laid down his sword and wept with gratitude. You can look out across the Judean hills toward the desert, where Montgisard once echoed with the thunder of hooves. The silver mask is long gone, lost to history. The armor he wore has turned to rust and dust. The very bones of the Leper King have returned to the earth he defended. But what remains is far more enduring than metal or bone. What remains is the story. A story that refuses to fade, that resists embellishment, because the truth itself is so extraordinary that fiction would diminish it. A story that asks a question each generation must answer for itself. When facing impossible odds, when all logic counsels retreat, when your own body betrays you and your strength fails, what do? Do you surrender to the inevitable? Or do you put on your mask, mount your horse, and ride toward destiny?
Baldwin IV chose to ride, and for one perfect day, heaven itself seemed to ride with him. The desert wind still blows across those ancient battlefields, and if you listen carefully, if you quiet your modern doubts and open yourself to the echoes of history, you might still hear it. The thunder of 500 horses, the cry of Deus Vult rising to the sky, and the whispered prayer of a dying king who became immortal. Not by my hand, but by yours. Not by my strength, but by yours alone. Not for my glory, but for yours alone.